Look at all the money we've earned, Unc.
Ah, that's what I like to see. $1.95.
That's right. Gee, he sure knows his money.
Aye.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, I know that everybody has piles of gold to buy tons of Hearthstone packs and play like every card. So I thought it'd be nice to run through some budget decks that are still real decks. These aren't designed to be cheap necessarily. These are still maximum efficiency, high power decks, but they just happen to be cheaper than some of those like crazy Highlander lists. So I have 5 decks in this video. I'm starting with the cheapest and moving to the most expensive. So yes, Hearthstone's more expensive than ever. The cheapest good deck is still 4,300 dust. That's a lot, but still accessible to most players. I've also included the win rate stats and how many of the cards are going to be rotating in future expansions, because when you commit dust, it's not just about the dust now, but how long those cards are going to serve you in the future. So we're going to start off here with an aggro overload shaman list, and of course I hate to support shaman more than it already needs. And of course, you should really tread with caution on this one because there are some nerfs proposed to Shaman next week. So this list might get worse. Just stay tuned, I guess, before you really commit to this one. Because in particular, cards like maybe Mogu Flesh Shaper or Faceless Corruptor seem like possible nerf targets. But if those don't get hit, I think this deck retains a lot of power level. And this one's all about really playing a hyper-aggressive style with some powerful things like Thunderhead, fueling this deck to generate really wide boards, and then supporting those wide boards with follow-up cards like Bloodlust, or the new card Storm's Wrath, which is going to buff your entire board +1/+1, which also just has some nice overload synergies as well. Vicina is another follow-up card. And beyond that, you've just got high-pressure, tempo-based overload generating cards that are going to help you summon all those 1/1s, are going to help you empower your Lickum, and often they're going to help you draw even more stuff off of Spirit of the Frog. And then you've got crazy power swings like Mogu Flesh Shaper into Mutate, which gives you these giant minions way too early in the game because it's really easy to get a Mogu Flesh Shaper out when you're summoning lots of stuff. Also just some early consistent minions like Sludge Slurper and the new card Surging Tempest, which is just a great way to open the game with an overload synergy card. So a nice mix of new stuff and some old stuff, but I'll warn you right now, there are 9 cards out of 30 rotating out in April for this list, so this is kind of a short-term list, particularly because I think the linchpin centerpiece card of this deck, Thunderhead, is from Boomsday Project and will be rotating out, so it's going to be really hard to make this one work without some big-time replacements, which is a little bit unreliable. So although this is the cheapest and actually the highest win rate list in this video, I think it's one of the riskier ones. So if you're looking for long-term success, maybe avoid this one. If you're looking for, something that's going to just tide you over for the next 3 months or something, this list might go really, really far. But again, be warned with impending nerfs. Just don't quite commit to this for a few days maybe to see where things land. So moving on to our next highest dust list here, we have a Galakrond Zoo Warlock, which you can take advantage of the free Galakrond that you got just by logging into Hearthstone here to make this one a little bit cheaper. Only one other legendary in the list, which is Kronks, and quite a few common cards as well. This does retain a really strong win rate at 56.3%, and only 4 cards will be rotating out in the future, and I don't really think any of them are like key to the list, right? It's basically like, I think, Scarab Egg and Mecharoo, which seem very replaceable in this one. So this might actually be a fairly future-proofed list as well, which maybe makes this my kind of top choice for this video. Good win rate, still very cheap, and long-term Zoo is an archetype we know we can rely on as well. So all in all, just a lot about this one is going to hold you over for a long time. And of course, this deck plays with a normal Zoo style. You get out early minions, you leverage those early minions to do some crazy stuff, and particularly this list has a lot of token summoning and death rattle plays around cards like Knife Juggler and Evil Genius. You can really get some big things going there. You've got nice mid-game swings as well with the Faceless Corruptor. Keep in mind that could actually get nerfed. Even if it does, this list is probably going to stay pretty good minus that one card. You've got Sea Giants to also help you leverage all those wide boards. And then finally, Galakrond is a big payoff where you can get a nice big reload with 4 often rather large demons. I've been pleasantly surprised by how big the Galakrond boards are on average. and this hero power that just lets you keep summoning more stuff if you need to in the late game to try to finally overwhelm your opponent. So all in all, this deck is a really fun one because it's got tons of new cards from Descent of Dragons, and it's also just a staple archetype that you can trust. So a really good bet when it comes to a budget deck. Moving on here to TREANT Token Druid, still staying under 5k dust on this one, and a pretty solid win rate there at 55.7%. And this one's all about the new TREANT synergy cards we got in Descent of Dragons, things like Tree Enforcements and Shrubadier, and what else did we get there? Aeroponics is one of the strongest cards ever. It's just crazy good card draw. And then, of course, Goru the Maitri, the big linchpin legendary that makes this deck really worth it, I think, although it can certainly win without him, too. And then some leftover old TREANT cards that have been hanging around that didn't really get used too much before, like Mulch Muncher, Garden Gnome finally making the cut in a token druid list when before they often got left behind. Even Dendrologist now makes a lot of sense. So this deck's all about, again, going wide on the board, leveraging that wide board via Soul of the Forest, Savage Roar, follow-ups, just to make sure you're, turning that into tons of damage or some onboard buffs with Blessing of the Ancients or Power of the Wild. And it's a sticky deck. It's a deck with lots and lots of reloads. So it's not a true aggro deck. You're going to be just coming at your opponent 4, 5, 6 times in a game with a wide board. Eventually one will stick. You'll be able to kill them with a Savage Roar, and you'll win a lot of games. I do like this game plan a lot, and there's a lot of fun stuff happening in this deck, too, with cool big swing turns like Aeroponics and Anubis at Defender can both do crazy things. Goru can make some big plays, and Mulch Munchers are ridiculous when they get down to, 1, 2, or even 0 mana. So fun stuff to do here. Good successful win rate. Token Druid is an archetype that has been pretty consistent throughout the years. This does have 6 cards that are going to be rotating out, some of which look fairly important to the list because you need enough treants. So losing things like Landscaping, for instance, doesn't feel great necessarily, or Dendrologist is kind of a nice support piece. But I think there's enough Token Druid stuff out there, and there's still enough ways to get treants that this list might work fine even post-rotation in a few months. And who knows, we might get even more support in the future as well. So I'd say a fairly reliable list to commit to, and certainly one that's working pretty well right now with a solid win rate and still staying cheap at under 5k dust. So next up here, the dust total climbing a little bit up to 5660 with Pirate Warrior, but I have to say one of the big legendaries in this list is Leroy, and there's really no better legendary to craft in Hearthstone. He is the most reliable and trustworthy dude in the game. He shows up in every single meta. He fuels so many aggro decks as their big finisher, so that's almost like you didn't really spend the dust anyway, because there's a great value return on Leroy. And beyond that, there's a lot of cards here too that are just fairly cheap. You've got Ankar as the other new expensive piece of the puzzle. If you happen to open that in your packs or use your free legendary, you're like set. This list is super cheap because it's really just Leroy and Ankar that are making this one fairly expensive. And if you needed to, you could get rid of even the Town Criers perhaps in this list and replace them if you wanted to dodge the epics there to make this a very cheap list that also has a great win rate. It's a high tier deck in general in Hearthstone right now, and very few of its cards are going to be rotating in the future. And even the ones that are, I don't think are particularly necessary for the list. You're looking at Sharkfin Fan as a rotating card, and I'm not spotting the other one right. Oh, Town Crier is rotating, which is really not that important either. So really a deck list that could last you for a couple years potentially, or at least like a year and a half or something at this stage. So a good one to commit to. And of course, you know how Pirate Warrior plays probably. It's just fast, in your face, tons of early pressure, tons of weapon damage, lots of follow-up burst damage with charge cards and big hits from Arcanite Reapers and Leroys. And you just go, go, go. The new card Skybarge in particular helps you get there. Ankar is pretty nuts as well. I'll warn you yet again, I think there's a slim chance Ankar could get nerfed in the nerf announcements next week. If it does, this deck probably gets significantly worse. So be careful. Again, this might be one you need to wait on a few days just to see what those nerfs are. If it doesn't get hit, you're good to go. If Ankar gets nerfed, maybe keep an eye on it for the future. I think it could still be a pretty good list, even without Ankar. But Ankar makes it much, much better. So just be warned and tread carefully as always. But outside that, this list is fast. It wins games quick. It's great for climbing. It's legend capable and still pretty cheap. So all around a great choice. And then finally here, one last list in this video, and it's the most expensive, coming in over 6K dust. But I have to say it's one of the more fun or unique or enjoyable lists, and something you probably didn't anticipate you could even play on a budget. It's pure Paladin, a new archetype, still rocking a 55% win rate, even though it's not topping the like tier lists overall. There are still some good budget deck lists out there, like this one that is only running one legendary. It does have quite a few epics, which is where the expense comes in. On this one, you might be able to replace those, but it's going to be a little harder because you can't toss in neutral cards, and as you move down the Paladin card list, they get a little bit weaker. You're kind of running all the best stuff already, so you would be lowering the power level fairly significantly. But this deck just does some really cool stuff with some crazy powerful turns. Lightforged Zealot is one of the best new cards in the expansion. It's True Silver Champion with a body attached for the same cost. That's ridiculous. Lightforged Crusader is a big, heavy-hitting card with just a great feel to it. It kind of feels like a legendary, gives you tons of stuff to play. This deck has a good, early, consistent game plan. You just get minions out, you follow those up, and you just kind of go and you pressure your opponent. So it's easy to play in a lot of ways. You just play your next biggest thing, and you just kind of win, which is often a great way to feel when you play Hearthstone. And then you got Tyrion down there as the big staple legendary in this list. Frankly, you could probably do this without Tyrion and make this even cheaper. Tyrion's one of those cards that's like you don't hate having in your collection, but he also doesn't show up that often in deck lists lately. I mean, yes, 3-4 years ago, he was pretty commonly seen. Nowadays, it's a little bit harder for him to make the cut, but still, it's just like, that's a good card to craft. It feels good. It's great to play. So not a huge dust commitment there, I don't think, at least. It's one of the more fun legendaries you can have, and just feels like you should own it. So it's always a good one. So all in all, a fun new archetype here. Probably the most unique deck on this video. And although the most expensive, I don't know if this archetype's going to last or not, but you're just adding a lot of good Paladin cards to your collection. If you're somebody who likes that style, likes that class, that theme, then this one's going to serve you pretty well. It does have some cards rotating out, of course, things like Glowstone Technician that probably aren't super important, but nonetheless, probably can replace those in the future. So there's a fair bit of future proofing in this list as well. And there you go, folks. That is my recommendations for 5 budget decks right now. One final warning, these lists could change as the meta moves around nerfs. That's always a possibility. You can't really predict that stuff, but I'll tell you, the links in the description below to the HS replay pages for these deck lists will update over time live. So if nerfs hit, you'll still be able to monitor the win rates on these decks. Maybe they plummet from 55 to 45%. You'll know it's not a good idea to craft that. So if you wait a few days, check these out, and they still look good, you're probably good to go, but just keep an eye on the data via those links. That said, if you guys have any other decks that have been working out for you, they're super cheap, of course, feel free to share those in the comments below. Always curious to hear what you got. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.
Dragons take flight above the ice and snow.